So, Congressman, that was a very full-throated, athletic endorsement of Joe Biden last night. You had the arms flailing on the stage, going back and forth. It was the full Beto O'Rourke treatment that you gave him. But with regard to Senator Sanders, you just mentioned the word. You don't want to see anybody diminish any of the other candidates. Well, what do you think? Are you now an establishment Democrat ganging up on Bernie Sanders as a result of your endorsement? Because some of the language he has employed in his rallies lately indicates that he thinks there is a division in the Democratic Party, portion of the party that would now include you, against him, trying to stop him, as he phrases it. So what's the deal? Which part are you part of?
Yeah. I am who I am. Same guy, believe in the same things, and just want to be there for my country at this defining moment of truth. And, you know, thinking about the candidates, listening to them. And this is a decision that I came late to. Really wanted to make sure that I made the right one. Decided that Joe Biden's the best person to be at the top of the ticket. And to your point, Mike, I just don't know that it helps when any of the candidates dismiss the other candidates or their supporters, or write them off or write them out. We need as many people on our side going in. Certainly every Democrat, no matter what your stripe or what part of the party you exist in. But we also need independents. And I'd go so far as to say we need moderate Democrats. In 2018, when I took on Ted Cruz, there were nearly 500,000 Texans who voted for Greg Abbott, a Republican, and voted for me on the same ballot. If we're going to win in states like Texas, and I really do think we must, 38 electoral college votes in the state. Imagine if the Democratic nominee won those. Donald Trump is over. But to win Texas, you've got to have someone who can bring everyone in. So I would just caution all the candidates to make sure that you're talking inclusively about your fellow Democrats and your fellow Americans, for that matter.
Beto, it's Claire McCaskill. Listen, first of all, kudos to you for trying to keep our party together. And you've been very careful this morning and very skillful in talking about how we can't demonize anyone. I hope some of that bleeds over to the Bernie camp and the Bernie supporters, because it's going to be a problem if they keep demonizing anyone who's not for them. I don't think anybody in America would call you an establishment politician or a corporate interest or institution. You are a candidate who got the ground game in Texas. You did it like no one had ever done it before. Bloomberg has spent just a lot of money on television. In Texas, can you tell us, does he have a ground game? Is there a ground game? Is there organic support for him on the ground? Has he really ginned that up with money? Or is that something that is really not there and it's just about the TV ads?
You know, Mike Bloomberg has opened, I think, 19 offices in the state of Texas. I don't think there's been a presidential contender to open even half that number of offices in the state, including in El Paso, which he visited, and for which I'm grateful. He's hired a lot of really good people, including people that used to work for me, who are now making 2 or 3 times what they made for me. He's really made an investment in the state, a state that, as you all know, is usually an afterthought, if thought of at all. It's just so big. Media markets are so expensive. Presidential contenders just don't play here. So for all of that, I'm grateful. But Claire, to your question, I think those are purchased assets in Texas, and it doesn't diminish their efficacy. But I don't think they're as powerful as a genuine volunteer-led grassroots effort that I see on behalf of Joe Biden, that I see on behalf of Bernie Sanders. Really passionate supporters who are willing to do the very tough legwork of knocking on one door after another, making one phone call after another, even sending out texts to connect with the Texas voters here. So, yeah, I don't sense the grassroots support for Bloomberg. Certainly have encountered a lot of people who are supporting him. But I think the real fire, the real energy starts to develop when you've got those grassroots leaders. And I really see that in Biden's campaign, in Sanders, and even in Warren's campaign. We travel this state, as you know, and so we're seeing folks who are supporting all the candidates. But I think you'll see that especially play out for Biden and Sanders.
All right, Beto O'Rourke, great guy. I look forward to catching up with you again. Live from Texas this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for being on.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.